Hey, today is a printmaking day and I'm going to have a playtime with some Monotype printmaking, but I specifically want to try using some masks or masks. As I do this, I will no doubt interchangeably say masks and sometimes say masks. There's no rhyme or reason to it, it's just what comes out of my mouth at the time. Anywho, these are going to be super simple masks. It's just a way of masking off certain areas of the print surface with the ink so that we only get other certain parts of the ink on the print. Yeah? Does that make sense? You'll see what I mean. I'm literally just going to use some paper and cut out some holes in that paper to create my masks. So there's nothing too tricky about this, but it is slightly long-winded. But if you like a bit of slow in your mojo, then let's go. Okay, so the first stage of this process is to decide on what design I'm going to do. I've got a simple idea in mind to create a hilly landscape using what can surely only be called humpy shapes. I mean, they could probably also be called wonky mounds or lumpy bumps. Do leave a comment with your own preferred term, and anyone who later breezes into the comments without watching the video will get a lovely moment of word to enjoy. Anywho, as you can see, the design coming together here is of a few different hills and a couple of clouds. So the next bit of this is to separate out those shapes into individual parts which can be cut out. I drew over my pencil lines with a black felt tip to make it easier to see underneath my paper, and then I'm tracing the shapes separately. I'm trying to leave space in between them so that when I cut them I won't accidentally splice across one into another. I have my trusty craft knife and it's time to cut out those shapes. I'm resting my paper onto a craft mat to protect my table from the knife, and I keep turning my paper to move around the curves. The clouds are the most knobbly, so those are the ones I go slowest on. Once I have them all cut out, I can move on to the printing stage. So this is a piece of glass from an old photo frame. I'm using it as my shiny surface. You can see yourself up there. Hello! I'm going to pop that under there just to remind me not to mix up paint over this side. I'm going to use this side as my mixing side and this side as my printing side. Ooh, jiggle, 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 jiggle. So I'm stirring up the block printing ink, trying to use tiny bits of colour with bigger chunks of white, but I did rather blob in a bit too much black and ended up with a darker grey than I intended. Never mind, we'll just see how we go. Scoop! I spread the ink across the top of my rolling space and then use my roller to pull the ink towards me into a flat inky patch. Okay, so I'm laying down my first mask here, and if you spot the rookie mistake before I do, then feel free to crow about it in the comments. I won't mind because I kicked myself afterwards. I'll let this little moment play out though, because it actually printed kinda nice. So the mask is laid on top of the ink, and then I start making some patterns in the ink. They don't have to be perfect patterns, I'm essentially just playing with mark making, seeing what I like. Then I place a piece of paper on top, this is just plain printer paper, and press down with the broad flat of my hand, moving it around to give as much even pressure as I can create. Then I peel back the paper and... oh, bleep bleeps! I forgot it's meant to be round the other way. Yep, I forgot the #1 rule of printmaking, and that is that your print will be a reverse image of your plate. Grrr. So this meant I had to recut out a new mask of that shape and try again. So I rolled a smidge more ink onto the plate, and this time I tried to focus intensely on putting my mask down the right way round. Phew, I did it. I became slightly paranoid about this for the rest of the session, so the whole thing went even slower, if you can imagine that's possible. For most of the masks, I would take a first print, which was a deeper, more inky version, and then immediately take a second ghost print with whatever ink remained. This has two advantages. It helps to use up the ink on the plate, and it also gives a second tonal option to consider when assembling the design later. Also, once the mask is removed, you can press scraps of paper onto the plate to use even more ink up and get some cool grungy textures which you can save to use for collaging with another day. The nice thing about this kind of printmaking is that it's very relaxed and you can experiment with different tools or materials to make marks with. For the patterns I made in this session, I used a wooden skewer, sometimes as it was and other times wrapped in tissue, a cotton bud and tissue wrapped around my finger. It's hard to be super precise with any of this, but that actually pushes you not to worry so much, and I think that's a pretty cool upside. This session was a roller coaster of ups and downs, and that's because I never knew exactly what I was going to get. Sometimes I was slightly disappointed if I made the ink too thick or the patterns didn't show up. Other times I was pleasantly surprised at the textures I created with not that much ink at all. The absolutely wondrous thing about it all though is that sometimes the things that you thought you disliked turn out to be the things that you can make something from that you weren't expecting. All prints are not created equal, but all prints are equally useful. Finally, I decided I had enough prints to move along with, so I cleaned up the plate and then surveyed the chaos on my drying rack, which is the floor. Gosh, now what? It's funny how sometimes I can be very patient and other times, nope. I didn't want to bother waiting for these to fully dry before cutting them out, so I just carefully snipped around them, trying not to pinch too hard with my finger sticks. Somehow I managed it, and then I had a nice little sit down while I moved the pieces around, trying to decide on which combination of prints looked best together. I was really glad I had taken the ghost prints because I could mix those up with the bolder prints and create more variety between the tones. And it also meant I ended up with two versions of my design, both of which I rather liked. So the next stage would be sticking, but for that I really did need to wait until everything was completely dry. And I also realised the prints would need flattening as they were curling a bit as they dried. I had a quick go at sticking a couple onto cardboard, but I didn't like the slight wrinkling it gave them on their edges. Therefore, as they were only slightly tacky, I popped them all between some books and left them overnight. Sleep tight little printy bits. Next day I pulled them out from their squishy slumber and they looked pretty okay, which is good enough for me. I know I've got somewhere in my shed some of those little kind of sticky I think like you buy them when you are making like paper, like card crafts and things, where they're kind of like foam pads that are sticky on the back and the front, so you can kind of stick them down and then put something on top and it kind of has it at a what's that, a little raise from the page. So I've got some of those somewhere. I know I do because I used them for a thing, but for the life of me I cannot find them. I've looked all around and I don't understand where my brain would have put them. I'm a bit miffed about that because that would have made this a lot easier. But what I do have is cardboard. I've got some corrugated cardboard, which is thick, and double-sided sticky tape. So I'm going to go with that and hopefully that will work. It's just a bit more faffy. So I have no idea if this was the part of the project which took the longest, but it kind of felt like it did because of all these snippy little bits of card and tape. So many little bits. Also, I think I should have used some thinner card because after a couple of layers, the corrugated one I had did feel a bit like it was creating a mountain on the page. However, when I have a long-winded thing to do, that's when music kicks me into gear, so I popped on a playlist and hence the voiceover happening now because I let loose on the "Wait for me, I'm coming to. For context, I was making this project just before I was due to go and see Hadestown in London, and so it made sense to be wailing "Wait for me" loudly that day. Also, singing songs from musicals always feels like a bit of a release, and I seemed to need it that day. I use different music at different times for different things. Are you the same? In the shed, there are two moods generally. When I'm making more crafty things, I tend to have folk songs, musicals, or 80s or 90s pop on. When I'm painting or drawing, I lean into more mellow tunes, as well as audiobooks and podcasts. And if I'm writing, it's classical or chill all the way. For some reason, rock is very fun to clean up to. Comment below what music, if any, fuels your creative sessions or life in general. I'd really love to know. So once I'd stuck my 3D landscape together, I assembled my second version, which I kept a lot simpler and all on one level. In this second one, I figured I'd experiment with some black line additions, and I'll be honest with you, there were many moments in this where I thought it looked horrible. I had big outlining regrets. But once you're in it, you just got to keep pushing on and seeing if you can make it work. And actually, I think eventually it did. Committing to thicker lines around the hills definitely improved things, and by the end, I was rather liking it. So these are the final results. Somehow I managed to wrangle the 3D one into a frame, and from the front I think it looks pretty good. From the side, not so much, because all you can see is corrugated cardboard, but heck, let's just not look at that. I do have to note that the 3D one probably won't last too long anyway. The paper is thin and I think it'll end up curling again because the shed is starting to heat up as summer's kicking in. If I wanted it to last longer, I think I'd need to print directly onto a more sturdy paper or card. But this was just an experiment, so it's all good. Thanks so much for watching this video. It's been lovely hanging out with you. If you enjoyed any part of it, please do consider tapping the like button as it helps to support my channel, and if you fancy sticking around, then the subscribe button is never far away. Stay curious, keep making happy, and I'll see you next time.